Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Stronger Marriage webinar. I'm Camilla Reese. I'm the Utah Marriage Commission coordinator. We're super excited to have you all here. Our special guest is Dr. Carly Lebaron. Dr. Lebaron is a licensed marriage and family therapist and has a PhD in marriage and family therapy. She specializes in women's issues, marriage counseling, and navigating faith crisis and faith transition. Today, Dr. Lebaron will be presenting on how to navigate mixed faith marriages and faith transitions with understanding and compassion. At the end, the last 15 minutes will be dedicated to an anonymous Q&A session with Dr. Lebaron. So please hold all your questions until the end, the last 15 minutes of this 1-hour webinar. I've disabled the chat function. However, my chat line will be open throughout the webinar in the case that you have technical difficulties. Okay, Dr. Lebaron, the time is yours.
All right, thank you. Okay, we already practiced doing the screen share, so I shouldn't mess it up. All right, there we go. I'm really excited to be here. This is something that I'm really passionate about. I've been helping couples for about the past 10 years, try to navigate faith crisis and faith transition and learn to deal with those kinds of things and creating an interfaith or mixed faith marriage in compassionate ways, because it's a really difficult thing, especially if you went into the marriage with the same religious affiliation and now have had to make some pretty significant life changes. So I am just going to give the beginning that I could probably talk about this for 6 or 7 hours, because there's so much. It's such a complicated and complex issue. And so today I'm just going to be focusing on the very basics about strengthening the foundation of your marriage if you and your partner are going through something similar to this. So let's get started by first, if I can get my PowerPoint to move forward. There we go. Okay, let's just talk about a good definition for what a mixed faith or interfaith marriage is and how I define faith transitions or faith crisis. So a mixed faith marriage, in what I treat, is usually any marriage or couple, even if you're not married, that shares some kind of different religious affiliation, or one member of the couple is religious and the other member of the couple is not religious. And there's a really big difference in the clients that I've helped in terms of whether they entered into the relationship knowing that there was a different religious affiliation, and the faith crisis or faith transition happening after the marriage was already established. So they went into the relationship with the same religious affiliation, and then something happened with one or both of the partners where their faith changed and now the marriage is a little bit different. So we talk about that in terms of there's been a change in what we call the marital contract. When you marry your partner, there's kind of these ideas and expectations about what you think your marriage is going to be like. And if there's a significant shift, like a faith transition during the marriage, after some of these expectations have already been established and agreed to, whether explicitly or implicitly, it feels really jarring. It can be really difficult for the marriage itself and for the individual partners in the marriage. So when I talk about faith crisis and faith transition, these are the definitions that I use. A faith crisis is either an event or a certain set of information that disrupts or changes one's previously held religious beliefs. So if something happens or you get new information that make you feel differently about your religious affiliation, that's what we would term as a faith crisis. A faith transition is when somebody leaves their religion altogether, either becoming inactive in religion as a whole or transitioning to another religion. So those are kinds of the definitions that we'll be basing things on as we get started and as we talk about stuff today. So there's different ways that we view religion, and the ways that we view religion and marriage are going to be really impactful on how you process through a mixed faith marriage. First, marriage is primarily seen as either a legal contract, something that you go and you sign that piece of paper and the government recognizes you as a married couple, and as a societal construct, which is the idea that the society has about what marriage is, what the function of marriage is, what the utility is. It's seen as a partnership by some people, whether that be a romantic partnership or a business partnership or some combination of those. And so one of the first questions you have to ask yourself is, what was my expectation and what are my beliefs about marriage as a legal contract and as a societal construct? But it's not just those two things. For people who practice religion or people whose marriage was based in a religious context, marriage is also a spiritual institution. So there's a spiritual bond between the couple, especially a couple that starts with the same religion. Sometimes in some religious contexts, marriage is a necessary step in receiving further enlightenment or growth or progression in the religious context. And it's also seen as a set of promises and plans from a specific religious standpoint. So if you enter into a marriage and the marital contract is that we are the same religion, we have the same religious expectations, we engage in the same rituals and practices of the religion, and then that contract changes, you have to start wondering what happens with that set of promises and plans that we had for that spiritual institution that we had planned for originally. Now, what I see in the couples that I work with, the biggest struggle comes in their marriage if there's an overdependence, and I can't stress that enough, an overdependence on a shared religion being the foundation of the marriage. That's when I see the most conflict with the couples that I work with. If the main foundation of their relationship is we have to be the same religion or we're not okay, that there aren't other things that help support or buoy up that marriage. And what I see in those relationships is that there's a false sense of intimacy that grows, that there's, okay, we share the same religion, so we must share all of these other same things as well. And so that false sense of intimacy that comes from just being the same on this religious standpoint can sometimes block or get in the way of real intimacy developing between married partners or coupled partners, because you don't really have the opportunities to learn to grow in differences, to be able to have difficult conversations and conflict that help you feel trusted and trustworthy with your partner as you grow together as a couple. And in these cases, sometimes what happens is that couples will end up moving away from each other instead of coming together if there's a faith crisis or faith transition, if the foundation of the marriage is that overdependence on a religious sameness. Here are some of the common challenges that I see with my couples that I work with who are going through mixed faith marriages or faith transitions in their marriage. And as I'm talking through some of these things, I really encourage you to write down some of the things that have come up in your relationship or things that you are concerned may come up in your relationship. So as we continue to talk, that you're able to really identify some of those roadblocks for yourself and for your partner. The first one is communication barriers. And this is a really common thing with couples in general. But sometimes people going through faith crisis or faith transition and their partner might feel like there's certain things that you can't talk about that you previously may have been able to talk about fine. I know a lot of the couples that I work with where the partner who stays in the religion and their partner leaves their religion, they have feelings of feeling betrayed or lied to, especially where they feel like that marital contract has been violated in some way. And so trust issues can start to grow from that as well. And this is a big one, I think, for both members of the couple, and it's feelings of loss, whether it's loss of financial support or community support, whether it's loss of that idea of what the marriage was supposed to be like or should have been like. And when I say loss, I talk about it in terms of what we call ambiguous loss. An ambiguous loss is different than a specific loss. A specific loss would be something like a death. Death is something that we have rituals and traditions and expectations about how we handle that kind of loss. But ambiguous loss, we don't really have that way of forming those expectations, of being able to grieve through the specific loss. There's not really a handbook on what to do on grieving the marriage that you thought you would have. Next, a lot of couples experience either taboo or social stigma around their partner leaving the religion or them leaving the religion. And so that might end up in losing some community or family or friend supports. And this is a big one for a lot of my couples. It may magnify existing relationship problems that have nothing to do with the fact that their marriage is now a mixed faith marriage. So they have to be aware, you have to be aware of what are some of the marital issues that we were facing before this was even an issue. Another big loss is a loss of a shared meaning, religious rituals or traditions that may have formed a part of your couple identity. And that might also lead to changes in your marital roles where there was an expectation of, one partner being a leader or being able to engage in certain activities that they're not able to engage in anymore. Next is financial disagreements, changes in community support or connection, which is something that I mentioned around that taboo and that social stigma, that you can have friendship changes or extended family relationship issues So a lot of the couples that I work with report a feeling of they lose their community as they transition out of their religious faith, especially if a lot of their family members are active members of that particular religious affiliation. Co-parenting and parenting disagreements is a pretty common one. If one partner wants to be able to have their kids practice the specific religion and the other partner feels differently, a lot of times that can bring up issues about how do we resolve, what religious practices our kids do and do not engage in. So I really encourage all of the couples that I work with, and I encourage you, if you and your loved one are experiencing a mixed faith relationship, is learning to face these challenges with compassion and patience. If that's the foundation of the way that you guys are approaching this, then that's going to give you the most that you can to try to overcome some of the challenges that we just talked about. The first thing I want you to process and I want you to work on as a couple is trying to hold space for each other's feelings. And I like to think about it like we all have feelings and thoughts and opinions and experiences in these, invisible jars that we carry around with us. And when you sit down with your partner, it's hard because you've got these two jars that are coming together that are sitting with each other. And if we're trying to both talk about our experiences at the same time, it gets really muddled. So holding space for your partner's feelings means taking your jar of stuff and kind of putting it on the shelf for a second, and then both of you together sorting through your partner's experiences and then trading so that you have an opportunity to really be heard. Your partner has a real opportunity to be heard. And that way you don't feel like your partner's view negates your own or vice versa. There's room enough in a healthy marriage for both lived experiences to be seen and to be validated. The next thing you have to learn to do is how to have hard conversations in soft ways. Having a mixed faith marriage means sometimes disagreeing pretty strongly about things that you hold really close to your heart, things that are really significant and important to you. So learning good communication skills is really vital. I could do probably another 7 hours on a webinar on just communication skills alone. But if you feel like you guys are stuck, you and your partner are stuck in not being able to communicate effectively or resolve conflict effectively, I really encourage you to seek out a trained therapist, specifically a couples therapist, to help move that process along. And then each partner needs to have a support network. And I'm very specific about the people I tell my clients to look for in their support network. If you've decided to work and put your energy into making your mixed faith marriage thrive, you want to be sure that the people in your support network support you as an individual, your experiences, the things that you're going through, but are also supportive of the marriage being successful. I've seen a lot of clients run into struggles when they've reached out to either family members or friends or community members, and they get the individual support, but they're not getting the support for the marriage. Those people tell them, you should just leave, it's not worth it, that they aren't supportive of the marriage being successful as well. So it's really important for both you and your partner to find loved ones that you can talk to, that you can get that extra validation and support from, that are supportive of both you guys as individuals and as the marriage being successful. And this is a really big one, because I think sometimes when the marital contract changes, when people go through faith crisis and faith transition, there's a lot of pain that can be experienced. And I see this in every couple, every client couple that I work with, that both of them are really struggling, that it's a really painful experience to have to deal with some of that ambiguous loss. If you're able to keep in mind that you're going through pain, your partner is also going through pain, then you're able to remember that, I can hold some of that space that we talked about, that we can both be struggling at the same time and have empathy and validation for each other, even if we don't necessarily agree with each other's religious affiliations or the choices or transitions that are being made. But you're both struggling and you both want to be able to support and love each other through the pain that you're experiencing. Now, one of the themes that I see a lot of as my clients go through some of these issues is the idea of authenticity. I want to be able to live a life that feels authentic to me, that feels true to me. And that's on both sides of the person who is maybe participating in religion, the person who's changing religion or leaving religion altogether. Most of the people, if not all of the people that I've talked to, aren't making these choices flippantly, that these are difficult decisions that have been very thoughtful and have been, really wrestled over sometimes. And I had one client who said to a partner this quote, and I really liked it. And I think this is kind of the spirit that I want to carry as we talk about this topic today. I love you and want you to live what feels authentic and true for you, and I want the same for me. Sometimes in mixed faith relationships, you want your partner to essentially be on the same side as you, to see things the same way as you, and that's not always possible. So again, using that idea of holding space for one another, that your partner wants to live what feels authentic and true for them, and you want to live what feels authentic and true for you. And how can we make space in our marriage, in our family, in our relationship for us to both be able to do so at the same time? And one of the keys to that is having a really strong marital foundation. So I'm going to give you a couple of things that you can start working on so that you can improve the marital foundation that you have with your partner. The first one, and this is one we're going to go into in a little bit more depth in a moment, is identifying shared values, beliefs, and goals. And the idea here is that you don't necessarily have to practice the same religion in order to value the same things. So one of the first things that I have my clients do is sit down together and talk about what are some of the things that they value regardless of their religious context. Charity, service, love, honesty, all of those things. What things do we still believe in that we have shared ground on? What goals do we still have as a couple and as a family and as individuals that we still think are positive and helpful goals, regardless of our religious affiliation? The second thing for strengthening that marital foundation is creating traditions and rituals, both as a couple and as a family, that foster connection regardless of religion. So if a lot of the traditions and rituals that you had before, let's say you experienced a faith crisis or faith transition in your marriage, and now you're an interfaith couple, finding ways that you can create traditions that aren't specifically religious. That can be around holidays, that can just be around everydays. A lot of couples talk about, okay, we used to practice this particular religious activity on this day, finding new traditions and rituals that help you guys connect as a couple that can maybe take the place for some of those rituals or traditions that have changed since the faith crisis or faith transition. Next, and this is a really important one, especially if you were able to identify some of those pre-existing issues before the religious issue came up, is dealing with the non-religious marital issues that are getting in the way of your relationship being healthy in general. So if you guys were fighting over money or in-law relationships, if you had a difficult time communicating or resolving conflict together, being able to focus on the non-religious marital issues and start to heal those and work on those will help you from sometimes scapegoating the religious issue as the reason why your marriage isn't working. Yes, having a mixed faith relationship can be very difficult and complex, and you have to work hard on that. But you also have to work really hard on the other aspects of your marriage that might be contributing to some of the marital issues. So if you have identified some of those issues that you and your partner are struggling with, I really encourage you, try some self-help materials. Obviously, you're here today, so this is a great example of using self-help to your advantage. But if you feel really stuck in some of those patterns and want to improve, I'm a huge advocate for therapy, both as a human being and as a therapist myself. It can be an incredibly life-changing experience. So if you can find somebody in your community and get started on that process, that would be a great way for you to help strengthen that marital foundation. Now, next, this is a handout that I've provided. We sent that out just a little bit before the webinar. If you didn't get that, I also believe that we're going to link that in the chat box so that you can have access to it. And it's a handout that I give to my clients, regardless of whether or not these are mixed faith clients or just couples that are coming in for help on improving their relationship. And it's called the Marriage Vision Statement. It's a couple of pages of this document that help a couple really focus on some of their expectations, like we talked about, for their relationship, what they want out of marriage. So the homework that I'm going to give you is to print out 3 copies of the Marriage Vision Statement. And for the first half of the homework, I want you and your partner to individually fill out your own version of the Marriage Vision Statement. That covers a lot of different aspects of the relationship: religious, financial, co-parenting, sexual relationship. So it's pretty broad in terms of the topics. And you're going to answer the questions that are provided on that document just for yourself without your partner's input. And then once each of you has done that, I want you to come together as a couple, and I want you to just question by question go through and talk about what your expectations, what your vision is or has been for your marriage. See what lines up, see what conflicts, see if there's something that you guys need to work on as a couple. And then once you've done that, with that third copy of the marriage vision statement, sit down together and cultivate a vision for your marriage together. Answer those questions using your ability to communicate, resolve conflict, and maybe some of those things are more similar than you thought. And so you're able to just essentially copy them down from your own individual ones. But having this conversation will help you guys have a better understanding of what it is that you both want to get out of your relationship. So like I said, I'm going to talk a little bit more about finding common values, because I think this is a really important aspect of being able to thrive in a mixed faith marriage. So the first thing I want to reinforce, because I've mentioned it before, is not seeing values only through the lens of a religion, that you're able to see values that are important to you and important to your partner as something that doesn't necessarily have to be linked specifically to a religious practice or belief system. And there's a couple of different values that you'll have to examine together as a couple. There's personhood values, which is just the idea of like what makes a person a good person. And some of these expectations, some of these views and values, and this is something I'm always really excited about when I work with my couples, is that regardless of religion, these probably haven't changed really significantly. That you may both still believe, whether you're in a religion or not in a religion, or you have different religious contexts, that good people are honest, that good people have, integrity. And so being able to really see for yourself what you believe are values that you hold as a person, values that you want your partner to hold as a person. And then social values. So this might be, socio-political, this might be things that you guys are interested in or value in your society and helping your community. And then moral values. What do you think a moral person does? And there is probably some significant overlap between personhood values and moral values. And that's something that as you start to examine them outside of a religious context, you might see that there's more overlap in what you value than what you thought. And then you want to ask yourself, okay, if these are the things that we really value as a couple, if this is what we really value in the relationship, then how are we going to put these values into practice? And this is something that previously you might have done through a religious lens. Maybe you did service. Maybe service is something that you value, something especially that is a social value. Maybe most of the service projects that you were a part of were done through your religious congregation, if there was a shared religious congregation beforehand. Being able to go outside of the religious context and trying to find things that will help you put that value of service into practice, even outside of religion. Maybe going together and volunteering, doing something as a couple that you feel like fulfills that value. And here's another activity that I encourage you to try. And this is something, again, you can do individually, one at a time, and then come together and talk about where there's overlap, where there's not, or it's something that you can just sit down together and talk about in general. And I just call it the top 10 activity. There's lots of different things that we value, and we could probably make lists of dozens and dozens and dozens of things. And sometimes that makes it so that, yes, I value these things, but I value them at different levels. And so the difference in what your partner values and what you value might be pretty discrepant, might be pretty different in the importance that you place on the values. So the top 10 activity is sitting down and listing the top 10 things. I was going to say 5, top 10 things that you value that are important to you. And so that way you're able to look at those lists and see if the things that are the most important values to you are something that you and your partner still share. Again, what we want to do is find those common values and then try to use those common values as a part of strengthening that foundation. Another thing that I work with my couples on, especially if they weren't in a mixed faith marriage to begin with, if the mixed faith marriage happened after the marriage started, if there was a faith crisis or a faith transition that moved that away into something different, that they learn how to practice spirituality together. Because without practicing spirituality together, there sometimes feels like there's a gap or a void. And this makes the transition so much easier for a lot of couples who are going from having specific religious practices that they would engage in together as a couple to moving into something where they're still trying to practice spiritual connection. And it's really important to be able to differentiate between spirituality and religion because they are different concepts. The way that I view spirituality specifically is that it's the belief of something bigger than oneself that you belong to or that you can contribute to, or both. And so spirituality is just the sense of there's something more than just me in this world. And religion is a particular spiritual denomination that has a set of practices and beliefs to which a person can belong. And so I like to see spirituality and religion as two different things, but they can be related to one another. And I like to use the analogy of the destination and the vehicle, that your spirituality is part of the process. It's the destination that you're heading to, what you want to accomplish. And religion is the vehicle that you can maybe be going in the same direction, regardless of whether or not you're driving the same vehicle. And so when you're thinking about it with you and your partner, maybe you're in a train and they're walking. And even if you're not in the same vehicle, even if you're not engaging in the same set of religious practices, you might still be going in the same direction. And that's a really important part about trying to define those shared values, those shared beliefs and goals, even outside of a religious context. If we're still heading in the same direction, even though we're using different religious vehicles, or you're using a religious vehicle and your partner is not, then that gives you an opportunity to still be going in that same direction together. So here's some of the steps that I have worked up that help a couple to cultivate a spiritual practice that they can work on together. And the first one is to identify for yourself what your spiritual path is. And again, you want to try to take this outside of a religious context. So instead of saying like, I am this, or I want to go here, that's religiously loaded, to be able to ask yourself, like, what's important to me about my spiritual journey? What kinds of experiences do I want to have on my spiritual journey? What direction am I headed on my spiritual journey? And once you've had an opportunity to really define that for yourself, it's a lot easier to have those kinds of conversations with your partner. The second step is to sit down and to communicate as partners about your spirituality outside of a religious context. And again, this might be a challenge for a lot of couples if they shared a religion previously. And so a lot of their spiritual discussions were based in religious expectations and being able to perform certain traditions or rituals or engage in certain activities together. So just talk to one another about what your spiritual process is, what you want to do, where you want to go, the kinds of experiences that you want to have, how you connect to what you believe is this thing that's bigger than self, the thing that you want to belong to or do belong to and want to be able to contribute to. And once you're able to have that conversation, again, you might be surprised at how much overlap you're able to identify between your partner's spirituality and your spirituality. Step number 3 is, and it's something that we've talked about really briefly, identifying activities, practices, and traditions that match any kinds of things that you share in your spiritual journeys. So going back to the idea of maybe service is something that you see as one of the experiences that you want to have on your spiritual path. And I want to be able to reach out to others, to impact others for good. If your partner has that same spiritual process, wants those same spiritual experiences to be able to affect or impact other people for good, then that's something that you guys can do that will be able to exercise your spirituality at the same time, regardless of religious belief system or context. So being able to find something in your area that you can volunteer for, to be able to set expectations in your family, especially if you have children, about, okay, if we both want a part of our spiritual path to be authenticity and honesty, how can we engage in practices and activities and cultivate traditions around being honest as people, being honest as a couple, and letting that grow? And then step 4 is engaging in those practices together that will benefit you mutually, that will help create closeness in terms of spiritual closeness together as a couple, even if you don't share a religious practice. And so this gives you an opportunity to expand your own spiritual belief systems, to exercise your spiritual journeys, and to be able to do that together, even if your religious context has changed. And then let's just talk about building intimacy. Again, thinking kind of back to the beginning of the webinar when I talked about, I see a lot of couples struggle if they have an overdependence on shared religion to build intimacy, that it can block intimacy, real true intimacy, from growing together. So here's some of the things that I encourage you to practice as a couple to try to build that intimacy together. And this is especially important for people that are in interfaith and mixed faith relationships, to see the differences in the way that you view things as strengths instead of weaknesses. And I know that can be really difficult because it can feel like it's a huge weakness if you're on different sides of a belief or different sides of a religious practice, if you want to engage in something and your partner doesn't. But take the opportunity to look at it in terms of, okay, if my partner believes one way and I believe another, that offers me a broader perspective of what people believe. That offers me the opportunity to be more accepting, to be more understanding of other people's contexts. And it gives me opportunities to learn new things. Something that I've seen a lot in the couples that I've counseled has been, as somebody transitions out of religion or into another religion, that as they sit down and talk to each other about their religious experiences, it can be an opportunity to really see, new versions of how people see the world, to see new perspectives, and let that be something that you feel like edifies you instead of takes you apart from one another. I also, and I can't emphasize this enough, I know it can be incredibly difficult and incredibly painful, so I don't want to undermine that this can be difficult. But in order to build intimacy as a couple, when you're in a mixed faith relationship, you have to be able to learn how to support and respect your partner in their religious or spiritual practices or lack thereof. And this is a really difficult, I think, hurdle for a lot of my clients, especially if there's a real true devotion to a religious practice, and there's a lot of that taboo over leaving a religious practice, that it can be difficult to feel like you can be supportive of a partner if they don't necessarily agree with the things that they're doing and you're doing, and vice versa. So finding a way that you can be encouraging and understanding of your partner being able to live their truth, to be able to practice their own authenticity, and them giving space for you to do the same. I also think it's really important to make sure that you are communicating with a desire to understand and to validate, not with a desire to argue. This is a pattern that all of the couples that I counsel, regardless of whether they're in same religious marriages or different religious marriages, that there's a tendency for us to want to be right. And that tendency for us to want to be right in an argument or right about a set of beliefs or a religious preference can sometimes get in the way of being able to feel like you're close to your partner. A true sense of intimacy is being able to talk to each other and really try to go in with a sense of curiosity instead of a sense of judgment. And like I said, this can be, all of the things that I'm telling you to do are very easy in theory and are very difficult in practice. So again, I'm going to take the time to encourage you, if you feel like you're trying to do these things and you're getting really stuck, to reach out to a professional who specializes in the areas that you're struggling in, particularly with a mixed faith marriage, to get some help and to get some coaching and maybe some new tools to make that communication a little bit easier. And then I know I'm gonna beat this horse over and over and over again, but I think this is such an important part about finding a really strong foundation and building a really strong foundation as a mixed faith couple, that you have to make sure that you're working on building shared visions, goals, and dreams for the relationship. A lot of the clients that I work with had an expectation, right? That marital contract of, this is who we're going to be as a couple. These are the things we're going to do as a couple. These are the practices that we're going to have in our home, the traditions and the rituals we're going to be a part of. And when there's a change in that, that can be really difficult. So instead of just allowing that to be an empty space where there once were dreams, where there once was expectation, to be able to fill in that space with things that are still important to you as a couple based in those shared values. And something I want you to really keep in mind is that the future may be different than you imagined, but it can still be a really beautiful future that you can have together. So I finished a little bit early, but since there's so much information, I wanted to give you guys as much time as possible to ask questions, because I did a lot of really vague talking. And I may not be able to give you really specific answers in terms of your own individual cases, but I want to be able to give you guys enough time that if you have questions about some of the things like building intimacy or creating that nice solid foundation, that everybody has ample opportunity. So go ahead and click on that little Q&A box that there is, and it'll pop up for me. I'll be able to review some of those questions and then give you an opportunity to hopefully get some of your specific answers or specific questions answered. And in the meantime, I'm just gonna, as you guys are typing some of your questions, keep talking about some of the things that I wasn't able to get around to. But now since I've got a little bit of extra time that I'll be able to talk about, just gonna keep this Q&A box open over here. So some of the things that I see really commonly in the couples that I work with is they come in specifically after a faith transition or their partner's having a faith crisis. And most of the people feel really, I can't really think of a word other than unbalanced, like someone, it's like that trick that you see on TV where they try to pull that, the tablecloth out from under without disturbing the china. It's really difficult to, especially when you have a strong religious context, feel anything other than completely and totally destabilized. So if that's an experience that you're having as a couple, if that's an experience that you're having as an individual, that's a really common experience for people to have. That your foundation, the expectation of what you thought the world was going to be like, has really significantly shifted. And you and your partner's relationship, especially if it was bound in this shared religious context, can feel really uncomfortable. I think that's maybe a too soft of a word for it. Awkward. A lot of the couples that I work with will come in to therapy and they'll just feel like they don't really know each other anymore. I thought I knew you. I thought you were this specific kind of person, but now I'm feeling like, okay, did you lie to me? Were you dishonest with me? Was this something that you knew about beforehand? And when other people maybe are involved in the relationship, it can feel like it changes the way that you view your partner. You know, maybe you're not the person that I thought you were in the first place. Maybe you're, not the kind of person that I want to be with. It's really, really destabilizing to a relationship. So, I mean, first off, I just want to say bravo for attending the webinar and trying to find a way that you guys can process this relationship change. For those of you who came into a relationship that were interfaith in the first place, bravo for coming to the webinar, for learning how to continue to support and grow that relationship so that it can be, it can have a healthy footing. Okay, so we have a question. Let's go ahead and pull it up. Okay, so the question is, when you say identify shared goals, beliefs, or identity things you can do together, how do you know where to begin? Does it just come as you talk, or are there resources that can help facilitate that process? I just feel like I keep thinking, what are some examples? This is a really great question. So one of the things that I have with my clients is like, when you sit down and you think about your life moving forward in the future, what are some of the things that you want? And this can be something, and hopefully you'll notice a lot of these when you're doing the marriage vision statement handout that I provided you. Hopefully this will start sparking some of that conversation, but just consider it outside of the religious context. What kind of relationship do you want to have? Are there places that you want to travel? Are there financial goals that you want to set? Are there things that you want to teach your children if you have children? Are there, values that you want to exemplify? So being able to identify, let's say, for example, some shared goals would be like, we want to save up to be able to take our kids to Disneyland. That can still be a shared goal. Maybe one of the shared goals or beliefs can be, I'm trying to think of some real examples that I've gotten from my clients that I work with. So I have clients that experience faith transition who have left a specific religion, but they still have a belief in God or deity. And that's something that maybe they hadn't expressed to their partner, who was still a believing member of that congregation, that, oh, I didn't realize that even though you left the religion, that you still believed in a God, or that you still believed in, this particular practice, that you still think it's good to pray. Right? There are some beliefs that you're going to be able to hold together, and there's some beliefs that you're going to have to make space for. Some of the identity things, these examples would be, I think it's important to be honest. I think it's important to be trustworthy. I think it's important to be a good member of your community. And so using those as an example, that's a couple places where you can start. As you talk to one another, you can identify, these are the goals that I still have for us as a couple. This is what I want to accomplish, even as an individual. it's really important for you to be a participating member in your religious practice. I think that's a great opportunity for you to like encourage your partner in some of their goals that you may not necessarily share. So if your partner wants to go to religious activities, to be encouraging of that. And if you feel comfortable to be able to attend some of those things, if you're okay with it, to support your partner in those things. So even if you don't share the same religion, that you can still be committed to each other in terms of supporting one another in the practices that they have. Okay, so we've got another question. I think these pop up for you. I'm not sure. This is where I'm like not super perfect. Oh, and I have some in the chat box too. Okay, thank you. So the next question is, how can a partner coming from a religion that heavily pushes marriages where both partners be from the same faith and make the same religious commitments cope with the feelings of loss or missing out in their own religion? This is a beautiful question. And this is something that I talk about with a lot of my couples. A lot of my couples belong to religious affiliations where it's very much encouraged that you marry somebody of the same faith tradition or the same religious tradition. And that can be really painful when you feel like you have to choose, and sometimes it comes down to feeling like you have to choose between your religion and your marriage. And I think this is such a unique, I wish I could answer this for every couple, that is attending, because this can be such a unique feeling of grief and loss. And I think that's probably my answer for this is you have to go through the grief process. There's going to be anger, there's going to be feelings of betrayal and loss and denial and depression. And I think it really depends on how much, and again, this is a really delicate topic. I don't want anybody to feel, like I'm treating this with any less than the respect that it deserves. But some couples feel like it comes down to choosing between if I value my religion more than I value my marriage. But being able to have a flexible expectation there that you did the best that you could with what you'd been given. And now if you value the relationship, that you're going to try to work on building the relationship to be as healthy as possible. And again, I wish I could give more than just a vague answer, but I think that's such an individual question that it begs more specific answers. So again, I hope that's somewhat satisfactory. But again, I just want to really validate for you, to whoever feels that way, that that's a really painful and difficult experience to feel like, my religion or the members of my culture are telling me that I'm supposed to be married to somebody of the same religion and my partner was that, but isn't that anymore. And how do I cope with that sense of loss? Because obviously I'm devoted to this person and I love this person, and I feel sometimes like I have to choose between my marriage or my religion, and that's incredibly painful. So I'm going to open the chat box too. All right. Okay, this is a great question. I really like this one. Do you have more advice on how to deal with family members who might be critical of your mixed faith relationship? This is really hard. And I think this maybe even piggybacks on this last question, where, there might be a lot of social pressure, a lot of religious pressure, a lot of family pressure, that you're supposed to be a specific kind of couple, that you're supposed to share the same religious affiliation and engage in the same religious practices. So I would encourage you to try to surround yourself with people who are supportive, especially if you have decided that you want to prioritize your marriage, you want to stay with your partner, that you love them, and you really want to make this work and find a way that you can balance this together. To surround yourself with healthy people and people that are encouraging of the relationship. And for those members of your family or community or friends who are critical of the mixed faith relationship, to set really healthy boundaries with them, to let them know, you appreciate their support and their love and their encouragement, but that you're not open to hearing them criticize your partner or criticize your relationship, because you're trying to put energy into making things better, into making things work, not worse, guys, work. And that's, I think, a really important thing, that how do I balance these relationships with people that I value and people that I love, so that I don't feel like I have to, again, like choose between my family who may be participating in this religion and have these religious expectations, and my partner, being true to my partner. So I really believe that if you want to make your marriage the primary relationship, the most important relationship, that it's super important to have those boundaries set up around the marriage, so that the marriage is protected from things that could potentially tear it down. So again, being grateful for any support that they do provide, but being well boundaried and telling them that you're not open to listening to criticism or talking to them if they're going to essentially be harmful towards the marriage. Okay, you guys have some really great questions. So the next one, I'll pull this one up. What about religious practices when it comes to children? For example, one partner wants to christen a baby, but their partner doesn't share that faith or belief. How do you come to a solution on how to raise children through separate faiths? And yes, that does make perfect sense. Thank you so much. This is a really difficult topic too, because with religion, there's a lot of strong rituals and practices that are incredibly important. And I mean, using the word very freely, very sacred to you, that you want to be able to continue on with your partner, with your children. And when it comes to making religious choices for your children, that can get really messy and difficult because usually you're not the only voices who are involved. Again, we're going to kind of piggyback on some of the other questions from before. There might be family pressure, there might be, social pressure or cultural pressure to still engage in these shared religious practices. And I think it comes down to the individual couple being able to sit down and talk out, this is why this is important to me. Here's my other perspective, to be able to hold space for one another and to be able to make a decision for your children together that you both feel good about. So one partner may be comfortable with, for example, having the baby christened while the other partner feels uncomfortable with that. But being able to say to one another, is this something that you feel like you have something specifically against? And that is a more difficult, again, kind of individual conversation that you can have with your partner, or that I would have with a client couple. That is this a practice that one person feels really uncomfortable with or feels like is bad or harmful? And if it's not bad or harmful, if it's just kind of like I don't really want this to happen, but if this is important to you, finding a way to compromise on that. If it doesn't go against a specific spiritual belief, being able to, again, find some room to support one another in this particular religious practice or tradition, or to be able to talk to each other about, is there something maybe that's an alternative to christening the baby or whatever religious tradition or ritual that you're talking about that would feel like it meets the same purposes, but maybe is something that we design for ourselves, something that we create a shared meaning around, a ritual that we create that both partners are comfortable with. Okay, the next question is, during your lecture, I can click on the button and it'll pop up. So during your lecture, you had a slide that explains about facing challenges with compassion and patience. What did you mean by the authentic part? Can you explain more so I can understand better, please? Of course. One of the things that I hear from my clients who experience faith crisis or faith transition, and again, can be for the partner who stays in their religious affiliation as well, is that they feel like the choice that they made to leave their religion was because they felt like something, information that they'd heard or events that had happened went against their own personal belief systems. And so they felt maybe at odds with that particular religious congregation or some of the belief systems. And so they felt like I have to be either true to myself or true to my religion. So this could be like socio-political issues, this could be historical issues. So a lot of the clients that I work with who go through faith transition say, I left because I wanted to be true to myself. I left because I wanted to be authentic to my own beliefs, regardless of, whatever religious, not necessarily religious beliefs, but religious traditions, maybe more so. And I'm trying to think of a good example that I could use to really give you some more clarity on the issue. So for example, with a lot of the things that are happening just kind of in our culture in general these days, where people have a lot of really strong beliefs on social issues or political issues, having clients who belong to a faith that believes very specifically about, let's say, the sanctity of marriage between a man and a woman. And there's a lot of religious contexts that have that particular belief. But let's say the person in the couple feels like they want to be able to support, all marriages, all unions. That feeling like they have to stay in their religion would mean sacrificing their own authentic belief that this is something that's good or okay or comfortable, and feeling like they want to transition out of that faith because they don't feel like they can be their authentic selves, or support the things that they think are really important without going against, religious requirements or religious belief systems. Hopefully that kind of fleshes that out a little bit more. Actually, before I go on too far from that, I talked a lot about the experience of the person who is, transitioning out of the faith, but I also want to give, some space and airtime, so to speak, for the person who is staying in a religious context. I think it's really important that that person have plenty of space to be able to live their authenticity too. That if their partner has transitioned, I see a lot of couples where the partner who's transitioned kind of wants, to shed some light, so to speak, on the things that they've learned or their new beliefs, and may or may not want their partner to transition with them. But for that partner to also be respected, that if they are deeply involved in that faith system and they feel like this is what's true and authentic for them, that being a part of that religion, that doing those religious practices feels like that really echoes who they are and what they believe and how they want to live their life. But again, that there's a shared respect on both sides of those issues, so that both of you can feel like I can live my own values, I can practice or not practice a specific religion or religious context without feeling like my partner is either judging me or is going against me or feels like I'm stupid or brainwashed, that there's a shared respect so that both of you feel like you have space to do what you feel like is really right and true for you. And I think that's more what I mean when I say authentic, that you're able to practice for you what feels really true. Okay, next question. Along with the question about family members, you earlier mentioned to surround yourself with people who are supportive, not just of individuals, but also of the marriage. What does it look like to have people supportive of the marriage? How do you know when you have found those people that support both the individual and the marriage? Another super great question. I think the thing that comes to my mind first and foremost is when you're having a conversation with those people about your own individual experience, that they're also trying to keep in mind your partner's lived experience too. So let's say you're saying to your friend, I'm having a really hard time. I had all of these expectations about what our marriage would be like. It's really painful and difficult for me to think that we're going to have to change our relationship or feel like something has to be different. And this friend says to you, like, I can totally see why that would be so hard for you. That's really painful. I want to be here for you. But instead of being critical of your partner, like, I can't believe he did this to you, like he broke all these promises, that would be an example of somebody who's not supportive of the marriage or of the partners in the marriage. Someone who's supportive would say, like, yeah, that must be really hard for both of you. Like, I know that, your partner has gone through a lot too, that they've lost some of these things that were important to them, and you're both going through a mourning process. A supportive person who's also supportive of the marriage is also going to ask about how things are going in the marriage, is going to be encouraging for you to attend therapy or to keep working, is going to encourage you and cheer you up when you're feeling discouraged, is going to try to give you advice that's respectful of both you and your partner's perspectives. And I think isn't going to give you any of those direct or indirect messages that make you feel like you're dumb for staying, or that they're judging you for continuing to be in a relationship when there's been a faith crisis or a faith transition. I think it's someone that's just respectful of your space, of your partner's space, that recognizes that you both have your own pain and wants to be supportive and loving towards both of you. How do you know when you've found those people that support both the individual and the marriage? And I think it's that you don't feel judged. I think it's that you can go to that person and tell them some of your experiences and not feel like they're looking at you in a different way, that they're looking at you through a lens of pity, or that they're, giving you kind of like back pats, but you worry about them talking about you behind your back. I think if you feel a sense of comfort and a sense of safety with those people, that you've more than likely found, the tribe of people that will help buoy up the marriage and encourage you and provide you support while you're trying to work through this really, really hard thing. That looks like all the questions so far. I want to give a couple of extra minutes just in case there's any follow-up questions that you guys have. Like I said, these have been some really thoughtful questions. I really appreciate those of you who have asked questions and those of you who are even just thinking about some of these things and just absorbing as we're talking. I know that, like I said, this is a really sensitive topic and it's a really difficult thing for a lot of people to talk about. So if you haven't asked any questions, no shame. I know you're absolutely thinking really deeply about your own lived experiences, but I want you to feel comfortable. Everything's anonymous. So if you have something that you would like to know about, I'm more than happy to do the best that I can answer. I'm an expert, but I'm not a perfect expert, and I want to help as much as I can. Looks like we've got about 3 more minutes. And if anybody is like viciously typing to try to get it on time, I just want to give you another second or two. If not, on the next slide, I'm going to put up my contact information so that if you have something that maybe you don't feel comfortable asking in front of a webinar room of other people, that I'd be happy to try to help you, point you in the right direction. If you and your partner are going through this and you need a little bit of extra help, I'd be happy to, if you need to email me, I'm happy to provide you with therapist recommendations that are in your area, people that I know and trust that specialize in mixed faith marriage and faith crisis and faith transition that can help give you some more, personalized assistance for sure. Okay, so random question. Awesome. I love a good random question. Where can we find the handout if we did not get that in email? Thank you. Go ahead and click on the chat box option. Let's see. It looks like we've got that linked. I'm I really suck at Zoom sometimes, guys. If you can't find it in the chat box, if it's not linked there. Okay, it looks like we just sent it again. So if you received it, go ahead and check your email. Check your spam box. If not, and you can't find it anywhere, again, I'm gonna right now, actually, I'll go ahead and advance my slide. There's my contact information. Feel free to email me and I'm happy to email you the handout. Like I said, if you don't get it, please contact me. I want to make sure that you've got all of the resources that you have available to you. And like I said, if you have any questions that maybe you didn't get a chance to ask or that were maybe too personal to ask, please email me. I'm so happy to help, especially where this is something that I'm really passionate about, helping couples that are going through this, because it can be a super isolating experience, and just having somebody to talk to can make a huge difference. And in addition to my contact information, just wanted to provide you with some of the other resources that I have available on some other topics in case you need help in other areas. But that looks like it kind of takes that wraps us up. And I just want to thank all of you for being present. I know that, again, this is super sensitive, and I hope I was able to speak to some of your experiences and to be able to do so in gentle ways.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. And thank you so much, Dr. Lebaron. This was an incredible experience for me, and I'm sure everyone who attended. So I just sent the marriage vision statement in the chat again, and I'll send it again through email after this webinar to those of you who maybe registered a little bit later. And then this recording of this webinar will be available probably next week on a private YouTube link. So you'll need to register to get the link, but once you do, you'll have it forever, and you can always go back and view the recording of this webinar. Thank you so much again, Dr. Lebaron. This was so great. I was really in it.
Oh, I'm so glad. It's something that I care a lot about, and I really hope that all of you who attended got something that you needed from today.
Yes, you are absolutely incredible.
Thank you.
Okay, well, that sounds good. I'm thinking I'm just going to close it now. And if you have any questions for me about whether it's CEUs or just our YouTube channel or anything like that, you can email me at marriagecommission@usu.edu. That's also going to be the email that I send the marriage vision statement from as well. So yeah. All right. Well, have a great evening, everyone. And thank you again. See ya.
Bye.